The sun was just beginning to rise when James pulled into the airport parking lot. He parked his modest sedan next to the shiny luxury cars and took a moment to appreciate the view. From here, he could see the sleek private jets lined up near the hangars, their metal surfaces catching the early morning light. 20 years ago, he could only dream of flying such beautiful machines. Now he owned them. James had built Skyward Aviation from nothing but determination and a single small plane he'd saved up for years to buy. Back then, people laughed when he said he wanted to create a private aviation company. Too ambitious, they said, but James wasn't listening to them. He was too busy learning everything he could about planes, business, and the wealthy clients who might one day hire him. The early days were tough. He'd work until midnight, sleep in the small office he rented near the airport, then wake up at dawn to start again. Sometimes he wondered if the doubters were right. But then he'd look up at the sky, watch the planes take off, and remember why he started. Now, 20 years later, Skyward Aviation had 37 private jets, offices in 3 states, and a client list that included business leaders and celebrities. The company was worth millions, but what made James proudest was the team he'd built: pilots, mechanics, and office staff who shared his passion for excellence. Despite his success, James still loved to fly. There was nothing like the feeling of lifting off the ground, seeing the world shrink below as you climbed into the clouds. Though he was now the boss, he often piloted flights himself, especially for long-time clients or when delivering planes to maintenance facilities. Today, he was dressed in jeans and a polo shirt instead of his usual captain's uniform. He was flying one of the newer jets to the maintenance center 2 states over, a routine trip he'd made dozens of times. The plane needed some minor updates to its navigation system, nothing serious, but James insisted that every aircraft in his fleet be kept in perfect condition. He walked across the tarmac, enjoying the crisp morning air and the familiar smells of jet fuel and warm asphalt. His phone buzzed with a message from his wife: "Fly safe, love you." He smiled and texted back before slipping the phone into his pocket. As he approached the hangar where his jet waited, James nodded at the ground crew he passed. Most knew him by sight, but there were always new faces as the airport grew busier. He reached the security gate and swiped his ID card, then continued toward his plane. The jet gleamed in the morning light, a beautiful machine worth about $15 million. James ran his hand along its smooth side as he walked around it, performing a visual inspection from habit. Everything looked perfect. Inside, he settled into the captain's seat and began his pre-flight checks. This was his favorite part of flying, the quiet moments before takeoff when it was just him and the aircraft going through their familiar routine. He checked each dial and switch methodically, then reviewed his flight plan one more time. James had no idea that today's routine flight would change his life. He didn't notice the security officer watching him from across the tarmac with suspicious eyes. He didn't know that his casual clothes, rather than his pilot's uniform, would trigger assumptions that would spiral into disaster. All he knew as he finished his pre-flight checks and prepared to request clearance from the tower was the simple joy of another day doing what he loved most: flying high above the world in an aircraft that represented everything he'd worked for. Little did he know that in just a few minutes, everything would change. Officer Wilson had worked at the regional airport for 15 years, and he thought he'd seen it all. Drugs smuggled in luggage, fake passports, even someone trying to sneak exotic animals through security once. But mostly his job involved watching people, looking for anything that seemed off. This morning, as he patrolled the private aircraft area, something caught his eye. A black man in casual clothes was walking confidently toward one of the most expensive jets on the tarmac. No uniform, no visible ID badge hanging around his neck. Just jeans and a polo shirt, like he was heading to a backyard barbecue instead of preparing to fly a multi-million-dollar aircraft. Wilson narrowed his eyes. In his mind, private jets meant wealthy businessmen, celebrities, or politicians, and they didn't look like the man he was watching. He'd been taught to spot things that didn't fit the pattern, and to Wilson, this definitely didn't fit. "Hey, you there," Wilson called out, walking briskly toward James, who was just completing his external inspection of the aircraft. James turned, surprised by the sharp tone. "Good morning, officer," he said with a polite smile, used to being respectful to everyone at the airport, from the janitors to security personnel. "What are you doing around this aircraft?" Wilson demanded, his hand instinctively moving to rest on his radio. "I'm the pilot," James explained calmly. "Just doing my pre-flight checks before heading out." Wilson looked him up and down, taking in the casual clothes. "Pilots wear uniforms," he said flatly. "Let me see some ID." James reached slowly for his wallet, keeping his movements deliberate. Years of experience had taught him how quickly situations could escalate when people made assumptions about him. "Here's my pilot's license and my company ID. I'm flying this jet to the maintenance facility in Burlington." Wilson examined the licenses with obvious suspicion. The pilot's license looked real enough, with all the right holograms, but the company ID listed James as the CEO and chief pilot of Skyward Aviation. That couldn't be right. "So you're trying to tell me you're not just the pilot, but you own the company too?" Wilson's tone made it clear he didn't believe a word of it. "That's right," James said, still keeping his voice level despite the growing knot of tension in his stomach. "I founded Skyward 20 years ago. This is one of our newer jets." Wilson handed the IDs back with a snort. "Sure. And I'm the president. Look, I don't know what you're trying to pull here, but you picked the wrong day and the wrong officer." James took a deep breath. He'd dealt with this kind of thing before, though rarely so blatantly. "Officer, you can call Skyward's main office. They'll confirm everything I've told you, or check with airport management. They know me." But Wilson was already speaking into his radio, calling for backup. "Got a suspicious individual attempting to access a private aircraft, claiming to be the pilot and owner, but something doesn't add up." Other passengers and airport staff were beginning to stare. James felt the familiar weight of unwanted attention, the eyes on him, the assumptions being made. He'd worked so hard to build his reputation in the aviation community, but moments like this reminded him that to some people he would always be out of place. "Look, there's been a misunderstanding." James tried again as he heard the crackle of more radios approaching. "I'm scheduled to fly today. It's in the flight plan. Just check." "Put your hands where I can see them." Wilson cut him off as two more security officers arrived, their faces already set with suspicion. "We're going to sort this out, but not here." James slowly raised his hands, a chill running through him. The flight plan, the maintenance schedule, his entire day was about to be derailed. And deep down, he knew exactly why. It wasn't his casual clothes that had triggered Wilson's suspicion. It was his skin color and the assumption that he couldn't possibly belong with that beautiful, expensive jet gleaming in the morning sun. Within minutes, the quiet morning at the airport had turned into a scene that drew stares from everyone nearby. Two more officers flanked Wilson, their faces stern as they surrounded James. Nearby, ground crew members who had been preparing other aircraft stopped their work to watch. A few pulled out phones, sensing something wasn't right. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," Wilson ordered, pulling handcuffs from his belt. "This is completely unnecessary," James said, his voice still calm though his heart was racing. "I've shown you my ID. I'm scheduled to fly today. You can verify everything I've told you." "You can explain downtown," Wilson replied, unmoved. "Right now, you're being detained for attempted theft of aircraft and trespassing in a secure area." James felt the cold metal of the handcuffs close around his wrists, tight enough to be uncomfortable. A mix of anger and humiliation washed over him, but he fought to keep his composure. Losing his temper now would only make things worse. "I want to speak to your supervisor," James said firmly. "And I want to call my company. The jet you think I'm stealing. It has my company's name painted on the tail." Wilson glanced at the aircraft. Sure enough, Skyward Aviation was emblazoned on the tail in sleek blue letters, but this didn't change his mind. Could be stolen. Could be you're using a stolen ID. We'll sort it all out at the station. As the officers began leading James across the tarmac, a maintenance worker stepped forward. "Hey, I know him. That's the owner of Skyward. He comes through here all the time." Wilson barely glanced at the worker. "Stay out of this. Official airport security matter." James caught the worker's eye and nodded slightly, grateful for the attempt. "Call Skyward's office," he said to the worker as he was led away. "Ask for Lee. Tell him what's happening." One of the younger officers looked uncertain as they walked. "Wilson, maybe we should check with." "I've been doing this job 15 years, Wilson cut him off. Trust me, something's not right here. When was the last time you saw a real pilot or company owner dressed like this, hanging around a jet worth more than most people make in a lifetime? James bit back a reply. He'd faced this kind of prejudice before, though rarely so blatantly. As they marched in through the terminal toward the airport security office, people stopped to stare. A businessman in an expensive suit looked up from his phone, eyebrows raised at the sight of a handcuffed man in casual clothes being escorted by 3 officers. Inside the small security office, James was seated in a hard plastic chair while Wilson filled out paperwork. "Listen," James tried again, keeping his voice reasonable. "This is a huge mistake that's going to embarrass your department. I have a meeting in Burlington this afternoon with the maintenance team. This delay is going to cost my company thousands. Should have thought about that before you try to access an aircraft you have no business being near," Wilson replied without looking up. "The aircraft has my company name on it," James repeated, frustration finally showing in his voice. "I founded Skyward Aviation. I own that jet and 36 others just like it." Wilson finally looked up, his expression a mix of disbelief and disdain. "Right, and I'm going to win the lottery tonight." The younger officer shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, what if he's telling the truth? Maybe we should check." "We're transferring him to the main precinct," Wilson interrupted. "Let them deal with it. I'm filing charges for attempted theft, trespassing, and resisting an officer." "I didn't resist anything," James said, incredulous. "You refused to comply immediately when questioned about your presence near the aircraft," Wilson said, his tone suggesting the matter was settled. As they led him out to the patrol car, James caught sight of his beautiful jet sitting on the tarmac. Within hours, it was supposed to be at the maintenance facility. Now, who knew when, or if, he'd be allowed back in the cockpit? All because one officer couldn't believe that a black man in casual clothes could possibly own such a magnificent machine. The police station was busy that morning. Officers moved back and forth between desks, phones rang constantly, and the harsh fluorescent lights gave everything an unreal quality. James sat on a hard bench, his hands still cuffed in front of him, watching the activity with growing frustration. 3 hours had passed since his arrest. 3 hours of repeating his story to increasingly bored officers who clearly didn't believe him. 3 hours of asking to make a phone call, only to be told in a minute or when the booking officer is free. Finally, a tired-looking desk sergeant approached him. "All right, you get your phone call now." James was led to a wall-mounted phone. His handcuffs were loosened just enough to allow him to dial, the metal still biting into one wrist. He took a deep breath and dialed a number he knew by heart. "Lee Wong speaking," came the crisp response after 2 rings. "Lee, it's James. I need your help," he said, relief washing over him at hearing a friendly voice. "I've been arrested at Bay City Airport. They think I was trying to steal our own jet." There was a moment of stunned silence before Lee exploded. "They aid. I need you to bring the company documents, call our lawyers, and get down here as fast as possible," James continued, watching the officer who stood nearby, pretending not to listen. "They impounded the jet too." "I'm on it," Lee said, his voice hardening with determination. "Hang tight. This is absolutely ridiculous." After hanging up, James was taken to a small holding cell to wait. He sat on the metal bench, closed his eyes, and tried to stay calm. This would be sorted out soon. Just over an hour later, the station's front doors burst open. Lee strode in, followed by a sharp-dressed woman carrying a briefcase and 3 other Skyward executives. The desk sergeant looked up in surprise at the sudden invasion. "I'm Lee Wong, Chief Operations Officer of Skyward Aviation," Lee announced loudly enough for everyone in the room to hear. "You're holding our CEO under false pretenses. This is Diana Chen, our company attorney, and she's not happy." The station grew quieter as officers turned to watch. Diana stepped forward, her expression cold and professional. "I need to speak with whoever is in charge immediately," she said, placing her briefcase on the counter with a sharp click. "You've unlawfully detained James Thomas, founder and CEO of Skyward Aviation, and impounded company property worth $15 million without cause." The desk sergeant blinked in surprise. "Ma'am, I'm not sure what you're talking about. We arrested a man attempting to steal a private jet this morning." Did that jet happen to have Skyward Aviation painted on its tail? Lee asked sarcastically. Before the surgeon could respond, another executive stepped forward with a tablet. Here's our company website, with James's photo right on the leadership page. Here's our aircraft registry showing ownership of the jet in question, and here's today's flight plan, filed yesterday, showing James Thomas as the pilot for the Burlington maintenance run. The surgeon took the tablet, his expression changing as he scrolled through the information. I need to get the captain, he said finally, disappearing into a back office. Moments later, a middle-aged man with captain's bars on his uniform emerged, looking concerned. The desk sergeant was right behind him, along with Officer Wilson, whose face had lost some of its confidence. I'm Captain Rodriguez, the man said, extending his hand to Diana. I understand there may have been a misunderstanding this morning. A misunderstanding? Lee repeated incredulously. Your officer arrested the owner of a multi-million-dollar aviation company for trying to steal his own jet. As if on cue, the station doors opened again. 2 local news reporters walked in, notebooks ready, having gotten wind of the story from airport workers who had witnessed the arrest. Behind them came more Skyward employees, some still in their uniforms. Officer Wilson's face paled as he realized just how badly he had misjudged the situation. The man he had dismissed and humiliated wasn't just innocent, he was powerful, connected, and now surrounded by witnesses to his mistreatment. Get Mr. Thomas out here immediately, Captain Rodriguez ordered, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. And someone remove those handcuffs. James walked out of the police station into the bright afternoon sunlight, rubbing his wrists where the handcuffs had left faint red marks. Lee and Diana flanked him protectively, while behind them, Captain Rodriguez continued to offer profuse apologies. Again, Mr. Thomas, on behalf of the entire department, I want to express our deepest regrets for this terrible mistake, the captain said, his forehead creased with worry. I assure you we'll be conducting a full investigation into the incident. James nodded but said nothing. He was tired, hungry, and still processing the humiliation of the past several hours. A small crowd had gathered outside the station, some curious onlookers, a few more reporters who had caught wind of the story, and about a dozen Skyward employees who had come to support their boss. Mr. Thomas, can we get a statement? Called one of the reporters, holding up a phone to record. Diana stepped forward. We'll be addressing the media properly tomorrow. For now, Mr. Thomas needs rest after this ordeal. But James placed a hand on her shoulder. It's okay, he said quietly. Then he turned to face the reporters. What happened today shouldn't happen to anyone, he said, his voice steady despite his fatigue. I was arrested for being near my own aircraft. An aircraft with my company's name painted on it. An aircraft I was scheduled to fly today. The only explanation for why I was singled out is the color of my skin. The reporters scribbled furiously, and a few people in the crowd nodded in agreement. I've built Skyward Aviation from nothing into a company that employs over 200 people, James continued. I've logged more than 20,000 hours as a pilot. I've served clients from around the world. And yet, to Officer Wilson, I couldn't possibly be the owner of that jet. I couldn't possibly belong in that pilot's seat. From the doorway of the station, Wilson watched uncomfortably, his arms crossed defensively across his chest until Captain Rodriguez noticed and sent him back inside with a sharp gesture. James, your car's ready, Lee said gently, pointing to where his sedan had been brought from the airport parking lot. James nodded and finished his impromptu statement. This isn't just about me. This is about every person who gets judged based on how they look rather than who they are. I was lucky today. I had resources, witnesses, and a company behind me. Many others in my position don't have those advantages. As they walked toward the car, one of the Skyward mechanics stepped forward from the crowd and handed James a cup of coffee. We got the jet back, boss, the mechanic said with a grin. Airport released it as soon as the police called. Pete's flying it to Burlington right now. James smiled for the first time that day. Thanks, Mike. Good to know someone's keeping things running. In the car, with Lee driving and Diana in the back seat already making calls about the legal response, James finally let his shoulders slump with exhaustion. You okay? Lee asked quietly, glancing over at his friend. I will be, James replied, watching the police station disappear in the side mirror. But this isn't over. That evening, as James finally arrived home, his phone wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications. The story had exploded online. Someone at the airport had filmed his arrest and posted it to social media, where it quickly went viral. His inbox was flooded with messages of support from clients, aviation colleagues, and strangers touched by his experience. His wife met him at the door with a tight hug. "I saw the news," she whispered. "I'm so sorry this happened to you." "Don't be sorry," James said, holding her close. "Be ready, because tomorrow we're going to use this to make some real change." Later, as they sat in the kitchen with mugs of tea, James pulled out his laptop and began writing. Not an angry rant or a call for retribution, but a measured, thoughtful plan for how to transform this painful experience into something meaningful. By the time he finally went to bed, the first draft of the Skyward Initiative was complete, a program that would change both his company and potentially the entire aviation industry. The story of what happened at the airport didn't fade away as quickly as the police department hoped it would. Within days, the video of James being handcuffed beside his own jet had been viewed millions of times. News outlets picked up the story, interviewing aviation experts who confirmed what should have been obvious to Officer Wilson, that pilots, especially those flying private aircraft, often wore casual clothes when not on commercial flights. 2 weeks after the incident, James sat in a conference room with his leadership team, reviewing the formal apology letter sent by the police department. "They're offering a settlement," Diana said, sliding the document across the table. "They want this to go away quietly." James glanced at the figure and pushed the paper back. "It's not about money. Has Wilson faced any consequences yet?" Lee shook his head. "Just administrative leave with pay. They're hoping this blows over." James stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the tarmac where 3 Skyward jets were being prepared for takeoff. That's not good enough. That afternoon, James held a press conference in front of Skyward's headquarters. Cameras flashed as he stepped up to the microphone, dressed in his captain's uniform this time. "What happened to me was wrong, but it wasn't unique," he began, his voice clear and strong. "Every day, people are judged, stopped, questioned, and arrested not because of what they've done, but because of how they look. The only difference in my case is that I had the resources to immediately prove who I am." He announced that Skyward Aviation would be filing a formal complaint against Officer Wilson and the police department, insisting on a public hearing. The company would also decline any settlement offers that didn't include concrete policy changes. "This isn't about revenge," James explained to the reporters. "It's about accountability and changing a system that allows these mistakes to keep happening." Meanwhile, inside the police department, tensions were running high. An internal investigation had revealed that Wilson had a history of similar incidents, stopping and questioning minorities at rates far higher than his colleagues. Each time, he claimed he was just following his instincts as an officer. "Your instincts are the problem," Captain Rodriguez said during a closed-door meeting, tossing a thick folder onto his desk. "This report shows a clear pattern of bias in your stops and arrests." Wilson sat stiffly in his chair, jaw clenched. "I was doing my job." "That's what we're trained to do. Look for things that don't fit the pattern." "No," the captain corrected him. "You decided what the pattern should be based on your own prejudices. A black man in casual clothes near an expensive jet didn't fit your idea of what a pilot or business owner looks like. That's not police work, that's profiling." The next day, the department announced that Wilson had been terminated following the investigation. His police union immediately issued a statement promising to fight the decision, but public opinion was firmly against him. Former colleagues who had witnessed his behavior over the years began coming forward with their own stories. At Skyward, business was actually improving despite the controversy, or perhaps because of it. New clients reached out specifically because they supported James's stance and admired his dignity in handling the situation. Airlines and other aviation companies began examining their own security protocols, looking for potential bias. James's inbox filled with messages from other black pilots and aviation professionals sharing similar experiences. Some had left the industry altogether after facing constant suspicion and extra scrutiny. "This is bigger than just one bad officer," James told his wife as they read through the messages together one evening. "This is about changing an entire culture. She squeezed his hand. "And you're just the person to help lead that change." James nodded thoughtfully. "You know, I've been thinking about starting something new. A foundation, maybe. Something that could help bring more diversity into aviation and address these systemic problems." "I think that's a wonderful idea," she said. That night, as James sketched out his ideas for what would become the Skyward Foundation, he felt a sense of purpose stronger than anything he'd experienced since first founding his company 20 years ago. Sometimes, he reflected, the worst moments in life could lead to the most meaningful opportunities for change. 6 months had passed since that fateful morning at the airport. The summer heat had given way to autumn crispness, and the trees around Skyward Aviation's headquarters blazed with red and gold leaves. Inside the company's largest hangar, now transformed with elegant lighting and tables, over 300 people gathered for a special event. James stood at the podium, looking out at the diverse crowd. Aviation industry leaders sat alongside community advocates. Flight school students mingled with experienced pilots. At one table, Captain Rodriguez from the police department sat with several of his officers, part of a new community outreach program. "Welcome to the official launch of the Skyward Foundation," James began, his voice carrying across the hushed room. "When I was handcuffed on that tarmac 6 months ago, I never imagined it would lead to this moment." He paused, looking up at the gleaming jet positioned behind him, the very same aircraft that had been impounded that day. "We could have just filed our lawsuit, taken a settlement, and moved on," he continued. "But that wouldn't have fixed anything. That wouldn't have prevented the next person from facing the same unfair treatment." Instead, James explained, he had channeled his anger and humiliation into creating something positive. The Skyward Foundation had 3 main goals: providing scholarships for students from underrepresented backgrounds to enter aviation careers, working with airports and police departments to improve security protocols that eliminated racial profiling, and creating mentorship opportunities that connected experienced aviators with newcomers to the field. "Already, we've awarded 15 full scholarships," James announced proudly. 10 of those students are here tonight." He gestured to a table where a group of young people sat, their faces glowing with excitement. "In 2 years, they'll be licensed pilots. In 5 years, some of them might be flying for Skyward. And in 10 years, who knows, maybe they'll start their own aviation companies." The crowd applauded warmly. One of the students, a young woman who had grown up in the same neighborhood where James had been raised, wiped away tears. "We've also partnered with 12 airports across the country to review and revise their security protocols," James continued. "And I'm pleased to announce that Bay City Airport, where my unfortunate incident took place, has been the most enthusiastic participant in this program." Captain Rodriguez nodded from his table, acknowledging the statement. His department had undergone a complete overhaul of their training procedures, with James himself participating in some of the workshops. "Change doesn't happen overnight," James admitted, "and one foundation can't fix everything. But we can each do our part to make things better, one step at a time." As James's speech concluded, the hangar doors slowly opened, revealing the sunset sky beyond. A group of children from a local community center filed in, their eyes wide with wonder as they took in the aircraft around them. "And this," James said with a wide smile, "is the part I've been looking forward to most. These kids are about to experience their first flight, courtesy of Skyward pilots who have volunteered their time." He stepped away from the podium and approached the children, kneeling down to speak with them at eye level. Their excited chatter filled the hangar as James explained what they would experience on their short flight over the city. His wife watched from nearby, remembering how broken he had seemed that evening 6 months ago when he first came home from the police station. Now his eyes shone with purpose as he led the children toward the same jet that had been at the center of his ordeal. "Are you really going to fly the plane yourself?" one small boy asked James, looking up at him with awe. "I sure am," James replied, helping the child up the stairs. "You know, the best thing about flying is the view from up there. When you're in the sky, looking down at the world, you can see how everything connects. You can see possibilities you never imagined from the ground." As the engines hummed to life and the jet prepared for takeoff, James took his seat in the cockpit, where he had always belonged. Through the darkest days, he had found a new purpose, not just flying planes, but helping others soar beyond the limitations others tried to place on them. The jet climbed into the golden evening sky, carrying with it the next generation of dreamers who would never see the world quite the same way again.